welcome to this edition of Lancaster Perspective. I'm Mike Miller, and my special guest today is Beth DeLong. She is a North Pacific groundfish observer, and if you've ever seen Deadliest Catch, this is what Beth has done. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here today.
It's good to be here.
Now, most people have seen Deadliest Catch, and you're going to take us through some things because you've been there. You've actually done all that stuff. Talk a little bit about your background. I know you have a degree in biology, and talk a little bit about that.
I have a Bachelor's of Arts in Biology from the College of Worcester here in Ohio. Just went for general biology, wasn't even a marine biology gig, but here I am.
And now you spent 8 years in Alaska.
Yes.
Doing what? How'd you get involved with that from Ohio to Alaska?
Yeah, kind of an odd transition. So going to College of Worcester, we would get emails from our alumni department saying, hey, if this was your major, you might want to consider a job in this. And so it had a few different majors on there, and one was for biology. And it listed this program, and I thought, well, that sounds amazing, but I am not that hardcore. Like, there's no way I can do it. If I do sit-ups too fast, I get motion sickness. So, always kept it in the back of my mind, but didn't really think it would come to fruition.
So when you decided to do this, what did your parents say?
They were less than pleased. There was a lot of hesitation about it, and here I am praying I get the job, and Mom's like, how about you just pray that whatever's meant to be will be, and if you get the job, then we'll see about that. But they were nervous because being from Central Ohio, sure, all we know to compare it to is Deadliest Catch, and what the cameras there show us.
So when you just, because you actually work for, what's the company that you work for? Talk a bit about that.
I work for Alaskan Observers Incorporated, so it's a company that's based out of Seattle. So a lot of time is spent in Seattle with the National Marine Fisheries Service and with my company, and then the bulk of our time is in Dutch Harbor, Alaska.
Yeah. I've heard watching Deadliest Catch, I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
So when you went to the interview, what was it like? I mean, when you walked in, they say, do you want to work on a boat?
It was actually a phone interview.
Oh.
So I answered a lot of questions beforehand that were kind of like, do you get motion sickness? And so, I really wanted the job. So I'm like, yes.
You're lying.
I'm like, yes, but it's taken care of with medication, and it so isn't. The interview was just kind of a phone interview, a casual half hour. Here's some information about it and kind of what to consider. And just kind of making sure you were a fit for the job and understood there's a lot of isolation involved, and that it's tough conditions, and kind of making sure that you know that before you go into it.
So when you went to the final interview, I guess, is that when you said, well, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Oh, no, it was just the phone interview.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because since their recruiting person is in Seattle,
okay,
and there's actually a fairly high turnover with the job. A lot of people will do it for a year or two and get out. Yeah. It's hard on you physically and emotionally. So being a lot of turnover, they don't fly you in. You don't have to fly yourself to Seattle. So
that's nice.
It was just kind of a sign up and hope it's a good fit.
So the first day you were there in Seattle, it was like, okay, here I go.
Yeah, actually, I wasn't really too nervous. There was 3 weeks training, which I did in Anchorage. That's going over the different fish, what you're going to see, safety training. They really focus a lot on safety to make sure that if everyone else on board is, incapacitated in an emergency, that you can still get yourself,
sure,
preferably back to land. So it's a pretty intense training. I really wasn't nervous until flying to Dutch Harbor, and then we saw the boats, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting on that. And then it really sunk in.
I mean, when you first, because they're huge. I mean, but when you first saw it, what were you thinking? I mean, you're talking about, I'm going to get on that boat, but was it as big as everybody thinks it is, or is it massive? Is it?
No, it's kind of odd. You look at Deadliest Catch and those boats, because of the wide angle lens that they use, they actually can look longer than they really are. So the smallest boat I was on, I think was 97 feet. Largest boat was 340, which may sound big until you compare it to the cruise ships that are in
Oh,
port.
sure.
And,
Yeah.
those are 600, 700 feet.
Right.
So, yeah, it's not a whole lot of living room, but
But it's still it's your first trip out. Talk about your first trip out.
gosh. Uh, Super excited. I had a great crew for my first boat, and so it was a longer boat but skinny. So it was 133 feet long. I was fishing vessel Commodore, and so I was super excited. I'm up on the bow. I'm just enjoying the sea spray and enjoying the weather. We had great weather that day. It was a beautiful, partly cloudy day, which is unusual in Dutch, and we just get out of the harbor. We're not quite to Priest Rock, and the queasiness starts setting in.
Oh, boy.
And so I, go down to the rail, and the guys are trying to come up and have a conversation. It's like, I need a minute. And yeah, after that, it was a lot of time in my rack, not
Oh,
feeling well, and just getting up as needed.
Just as you could.
Yeah.
Was the crew pretty favorable? I mean, were they glad you were there, or was it like, why are you here? Or...
That crew was favorable. It
Okay.
really depends on the boat. Some of the boats really enjoy having us there. They understand why we're there, and they're all great about it. Some of the boats are a little more cautious with us. There's
Okay.
some tension in that relationship, and so they don't always encourage, kind of socializing with the observers.
Sure, right, yeah. So do they do the guys that are working on the boats and do they understand all the marine life, or are they just there to do a job and
Again, depends on the boats. Some of
Okay.
the smaller catcher boats, they know their fish.
what's a catcher boat? What's the
So a catcher boat those are like the ones that you see on Deadliest Catch, where they catch the fish and then they take them to a processing plant. And so we tend to catch a lot of pollock, and with my company, we actually don't do the crab program, but they're very similar boats. So we have a lot of catchers. They just do like 2-day trips, but there are also catcher processors that will catch it and process it right then within a few hours. And so it is a frozen package ready to go into the freezer within just a few hours of catching the fish.
Wow. If someone watching the show, thought, boy, I want to do that, what advice would you give them to say?
I'd say go for it, honestly. It's a rough job, but I have learned so much about myself through doing it. So, what I can handle, you have to be self-motivated. You really have to be motivated. But it was amazing seeing how our fisheries are managed, seeing just the wildlife, the beauty of Alaska. I highly encourage getting involved in it. So if you want to do my position, it
Right.
requires a 4-year bachelor's degree in any kind of science, basically, life science, chemistry. The only requirements are you need experience in dichotomous keys, so kind of being able to key out what species you're looking at, and statistics. And, I mean, there's not a whole lot involved with the statistics, but they want you to have a course in it. And so, yeah, there are a few different observer companies that you can sign on with, and usually requiring a 3-month to 1-year contract.
So how often do you go back? Are you here now and then you're going back, or what?
For me personally, that's really up in the air right now.
Okay. All right.
I was actually diagnosed with cancer last fall, so I'm home for treatment. So we'll kind of see what happens after that, but which is kind of unfortunate because it's a great job.
Oh yeah,
Love that job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's just talk about the jobs on the. I know you're an observer, but talk a little bit about what goes on. Is it like Deadliest Catch? I mean, people look at Deadliest Catch and say, "Oh, they can't be doing that." I mean, is it that way, or is it?
Deadliest Catch, for the sake of viewers and all of that, they add some drama.
Okay.
So you can't always believe exactly what
Right.
you're seeing on Deadliest Catch. But yeah, I mean, obviously they can't fake the ocean part. I mean, you can get some pretty gnarly seas out there.
Sure.
and yeah, generally the different positions and all, of the captains and everything, the dynamic,
Right.
it's fairly similar.
Do you want to go back? I mean, eventually go back to Alaska, or
Oh, I would love to.
really?
Yeah. It's it's kind of a love-hate relationship sometimes with the Bering Sea. She'll throw you around, and I have spent literally 19 hours straight in my rack because I just don't feel well.
Wow.
But then 2 days later, I'm up in the wheelhouse eating Klondike bars. There's a rainbow. There's whales breaching, and you're just like, this is the life. Like, this is amazing.
This is
So
what you want to do.
yeah.
That's when you were younger. Did you think, boy, this is what I want to do? What'd you do when you were just a kid? Did you want to do this, or?
Not at all. Fish were the last thing I wanted to study, even in college. I actually wanted to do forensic science.
Okay.
But I graduated in 2008 when the economy crashed, and it just kind of was a perfect storm of things not working out well, and I ended up in Alaska, and turns out I love it. So
That's for those, because you have a degree in biology. Advice to young kids that are in high school now that want to get into biology, or I mean, are they taking the right courses? Because we talked about when we first met at the trade show, we were talking about different careers for kids that didn't want to go to college, or possibly just weren't sure what they wanted to do. But in this case, you have to have a degree to do what you're doing.
correct.
Yeah.
This job does require a degree, which to some extent I find unfortunate because you could do the training necessarily without a degree. But for those going into college or even not, just find a mentor, go talk to your career counselors. There are so many jobs that exist that we don't even know about. I mean, like this one, for example, being in Central Ohio, we don't hear about this sort of job.
Right.
So really get out there, and the internet makes that so much easier now to go exploring jobs in biology or different guides at Barnes & Noble or at the library, and just check into options.
Right. That's ever any regrets about doing it?
This job?
Yeah, boy, did I. It doesn't seem like you have any at all.
No.
But other than your parents saying, "Let's think about this."
Right. Even on the bad days, there have been so many blessings that have come out of this job. I absolutely do not regret it.
Yeah, that's amazing. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a minute.
The average text takes your eyes off the road for nearly 5 seconds.
Did you know that 2/3 of teens and young adults who report abuse of prescription medicines are getting it from people they know, including friends and family? We need to remember to secure them in a safe place, even lock them up if necessary. Monitor your medications so you know exactly how many pills are in each bottle. And finally, keep track of your refills. If you are done with their use, properly dispose them to avoid abuse. You can do this in a number of ways. 1. Take them to a local drop box at the Lancaster or Pickerington police departments or at one of our drug take-back events. 2. Take the drugs out of their containers, mix them with cat litter or used coffee grounds in a container, seal and place them in the trash. Remember to remove all personal information from your pill bottles. Or 3. Check the prescription information regarding the specifics if the medication could be flushed, or call your pharmacist. Remember, if you are done with its use, properly dispose to avoid abuse.
This message is brought to you by the Fairfield County Adam H. Board.
Welcome back to this edition of Life's Perspective. I'm Mike Miller, talking with Beth DeLong, who has worked in Alaska on some of the fishing boats there. Some horror stories about storms and things like that while you were out on the boat?
Actually, the storm that was most memorable was still pretty fun.
Fun to be in a storm. Okay.
Yeah, oddly enough, it was a longliner. So I know Northern Leader has been on TV a couple times,
Okay.
and so it was that company, and they have great fishing boats. They're some of my favorites to be on. They ride really well, but we're out in the elements when we're
Right.
sampling, and so we can take weather days if it's a really bad storm and we don't feel comfortable being outside. But I didn't know necessarily what constituted a weather day. So went up to the wheelhouse, I'm scoping things out, and it's blowing like 50, 55 knots, gusting 60, which is approximately 70 miles an hour. So we're like, borderline hurricane level,
Right.
and, it's rough. About 30-foot seas, and so I told the captain, "Oh my gosh, looks pretty crappy out there." "All right, well, I'll see you out there." And he said, "I'm not going to tell you how to do your job, but most people would call this a weather day." I'm like, "Oh, this is a weather day." Okay, I'm staying inside then. But yeah, then just up in the wheelhouse, still motion sickness, but
Sure.
kind of going up, and all you see is sky, and then you come back down, and all you see is water, and yeah, it was a wild ride.
Wow.
It's entertaining.
That's. I had one. I was talking to people, telling them I was going to talk to you today. People ask about food. Do they ask you what you can eat, or do they just, this is what we have to eat? And
You better tell the cook right when you're bored if you have any preferences, gluten-free or
yeah,
vegetarian, or if you're vegetarian, good luck. Some boats have amazing food. The cooks really spend a lot of time on it, if you have a captain that really likes to eat healthy. And some boats, it's like eating at 7-Eleven every night for dinner.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
So I tend to gain weight when I go out to work just because you never know how you're going to be eating.
yeah. Now, you watch, when you're on these boats, one of the jobs on the boats that you wouldn't ever want to do on the crews that are working, I mean, you ever look at, I'd never do that. I mean,
There are some jobs that I think wouldn't be my preference, working on the gut table and some of those. I mean, you just end up with guts all down the front of you. I mean, you're never clean. You're also on a fishing boat, so
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not clean, really. But it's a lot of hard work. I mean, it's a lot of, there's the guy on the header, I mean, the position that he has to maintain for hours on end while passing the fish through to be headed, on to the catcher processors. There's a lot of discomfort with some of these jobs.
do they have to separate the fish? I mean, is there a law about, okay, you can't catch this, you can't catch that? I mean,
Yes. The boats that I'm on, we generally target pollock, cod, some flatfish, ocean perch. We cannot keep halibut, crab, salmon, or herring.
who decides that?
So it's a government rule because there are boats out there that actually target the halibut, salmon, and crab and make a good deal of money off of it. Then we are not allowed to catch them. We kind of have a cap.
Okay.
So they have a certain quota to make sure that the boats aren't out there like, darn, we got a lot of halibut, might as well keep it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an incentive to leave the halibut alone and to leave it for the guys who are targeting it.
They have people that separate those right there on the boat, and then
Yes. So
how would you? You look at a fish and say, okay, color, size. How do you know?
it's a lot of experience. So this is a bigger deal for the pollock catcher processors. There's a guy who is the sorter, and so he will be back there. And some of these guys are amazing. They're fast. They're very thorough and efficient. They really know their fish. And so they can be a great support for us when we're trying to take our samples and kind of sort by species. And so it's a big deal. There are legal ramifications, so they have to be good at sorting them. So the foreman then will identify those guys who can identify the fish and separate them out.
Wow, that's it. So when in your job then, are you checking these fish also, or are you just sampling the fish? What's happening with your end of it? I mean,
So with my end, as fish are brought on board, whatever kind of boat it is, catcher or catcher processor, then I take random samples throughout the haul. And that way it kind of takes a picture of everything that they're catching. And so my samples will say, we caught this many cod that weigh this much this many kilograms, this many pollock at this many kilograms. We'll take biological data. If we did catch a salmon, if there's one in my sample, then we'll say whether it's female or male. We'll length crab. So we take biological samples that way. But then all of that goes to the National Marine Fisheries Service, who extrapolate it out towards the haul, make sure that the boats are staying within their quota, that nothing's being overfished.
Right.
And yeah, so then it just kind of depends on what boat I'm on and kind of how clean the catch is and what the capabilities are as to how big a sample I can take to represent the whole haul.
You were there for 8 years. Is there any issue with the amount of fish? Are there more? Are there less?
It's kind of hard for, at least at my level, to get a good glimpse of where we are. We have several really good statisticians at the National Marine Fisheries Service in Seattle who look over all of this data. And some years it seems like we're only catching baby pollock. Where did all of the pollock go? And then you'll have other years where a class of pollock will show up and you're getting, good sized pollock consistently. So it's kind of hard, seeing the glimpses of it. But yeah, we're doing what we can to make sure it's sustainable.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you were so far west you were east, or you were so far east you went west. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've been on some boats that target Pacific Ocean perch or Atka mackerel. And so we go really far west down the Aleutian chain, basically as far west as we can go without hitting Russia. But by that point, you've hit the date line. So we're so far west that we're putting on our paperwork that we're actually, east as far as GPS coordinates. And
what happens if you go into Russian water? What?
Can't fish there.
Do you have to turn around and get out, or are they monitoring what the boats are doing?
We have not gone into Russian water, but yeah, you can see sometimes a Russian Coast Guard boat, or you can hear Russians on the radio, and so yeah, you bet if you cross over their line, they'll ask you what you're doing there. But they can also monitor by your speed whether you're fishing or not. If you're like just sitting still, or if you are maintaining a certain speed, they'll know that you're towing.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
But we just tend to avoid that because goodness knows we don't want to find out what happened.
Remember the first time you saw a whale?
Not the first time, actually, but I went up at the kind of the perfect time of year for my first contract. We went up in June. It was the beginning of bee season, which begins June 10th.
Bee season?
Yeah. So there's A season for pollock and B season for pollock.
All
so
right.
A season is January to March, and B season's kind of June to September. And the whales really come into around Dutch Harbor in August. And so, they're describing this to me, and I can't quite visualize it. And then it's August, and we come back, and the mountains are all green, and literally there have got to be 50 whales close to the harbor in Dutch, and you'll see them spouting and breaching, and it was just everywhere you looked, there were humpback whales.
Really?
Yeah. It's pretty incredible.
What do they look like? Are they gray? Are they black? What do they look like?
We don't get too close.
Oh, okay.
Because then you don't want to risk harassing them. There are rules against that. But looking pretty gray from where we are, and it's just an awesome sight though. But I do remember my first sperm whale and my first orcapod. Those are pretty incredible. You don't typically see sperm whales when we're out there, so that was pretty special.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple times about regulations and rules. Is it overbearing? Is it become, they're there for a reason.
Yes.
But is it getting to the point, or we need more regulations, or?
I would say they're doing pretty good. We do have a lot of regulations, and so my job is not to enforce them. If I see anything that I think looks sketchy, then I just document it and let National Marine Fisheries Service enforcement take care of it. And for that reason, I don't know all of the laws. I know the major ones to look out for. And the captains, that's kind of a big responsibility for them to be up on it.
The captains themselves, you mentioned, going in and watching them. Are they okay, or are they like, what are you doing here?
It depends on the captain.
Okay.
Some of the captains are great. They'll some of the crews are great, really.
Yeah.
They'll give you chocolate and hang out with
Oh,
you.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's a good
keep
thing.
the observer happy, especially
Yeah.
if she's female, and some of the captains are kind of this is my wheelhouse, this is my area. If
Yeah.
you need numbers, you can come up, but otherwise, get out.
Right. Yeah.
So they're not necessarily mean, but they're not thrilled about having you.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
that's so. We talked a little bit. You're challenging cancer right now, and we wish you the best with that.
Thank you.
We really do. That's so. When you beat cancer, are you going to go back?
I would love to.
Yeah.
My certification will expire, so I won't go back in the same capacity. But there is actually a, excuse me, there's a scientific survey that I did last summer with black cod. So then it's myself, another observer, and a few scientists, and we go out and kind of check the black cod stocks, make sure that they're doing well,
Okay.
check a lot of data on them. I would love to do that again. We get to go to
Sure.
a few different ports, and so that's always a good treat.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That is Beth. It's been great having you here today. I mean, you talked about just everything that you've done and everything, the challenges that you face now, and we talked earlier about people that if somebody just wanted to go work on a boat, what advice would you give to them? Just not necessarily become a biologist or be involved in what you're doing, but this looks pretty neat. I think I'll get. What would you tell them?
I would say go for it, keep an open mind, but be humble. It's the people who get on board and say, "Oh, I've got this," down,
Yeah.
I'm totally fine.
Yeah.
They tend to be the ones who don't make it.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to have somebody above you and teach you how to do it, to learn and to stay humble,
Right.
you know that you'll work hard, but you'll do well.
Absolutely. It's been great having you here. It really is, and good luck with.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
We're talking with Beth Long, who is a fish observer in Alaska, and we appreciate her. And we offer that if you would like to, we'd like you to pray for Beth as she battles cancer. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Life's Perspective. I'm Mike Miller. And remember, until we meet again, let's make a difference.